joining, everyone. We are still waiting for everyone to join. We have generally, I think we have today over 400 registrations, and we typically get about 50 to 60% of that. And it takes a while to onboard all these people, so we're waiting until we sort of reach that number. And I'm watching the count go up. Slowing down a little bit here. I think it's sort of plateaued at 135. I think I'm going to slowly start, okay? Welcome, everyone, to our CHBA webinar series, Public Reviews for the 2025 National Codes. I'm Frank Lohmann, CHBA Senior Director of Building Science, and I'm joined today by Sarah Caron, CHBA's Director of Renovation Services, and Alex Bols, CHBA's Senior Technical Advisor on Codes and Standards. Sarah will tell us about CHBA's renovator manuals later on and run the polls in today's session, and Alex will manage the questions and answers throughout the webinar. And before I dazzle you with all the details about the code changes coming, here's some housekeeping that you've probably come familiar with if you've attended our webinars. We have muted all participants so that there are no distractions. We will, however, make the webinar a bit interactive and even a bit more so today. Firstly, you can ask questions throughout by writing them in the question and answer panel, which you can access by clicking on the Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom window. We may answer some of your questions live during the webinar or at the end or directly in the Q&A panel in writing during the webinar. Secondly, we'll have a few polls for you, and when we launch a poll question, you will see a response function pop up, and then you can pick your choice. Maybe, Sarah, let's try our first poll right now, a question on the primary region where you and your business or organization operate. So you see the regions here. It's not all provinces and territories because we have only 10 choices, and we would like national and outside Canada be part of it. And so the region is important, so we can compare where our audience comes from with other webinars. And when we have enough results, Sarah will stop it. We'll see where our regional participants come from. I think, let's check on the number of participants here. Yes, we have now at 180 participants. There are the results. So strong showing from BC, 22%, and the Prairies, excellent. Ontario and Quebec, the winner in this one so far, quite a few with national scope. And the Atlantic provinces probably within the proportion that they should be. Excellent, very broad, very good representation. Thank you. We'll continue with housekeeping. There's one more item here. You're probably all experienced in Zoom or Teams or WebEx, but just to remind you that you can manage your own view of the webinar and to make the PowerPoint bigger or smaller by sliding the dividing bar. Also, please be aware that the webinar is being recorded and the recordings will be available on the CHBA website, usually within a few days in case you can't stay to the end or you want to listen to a certain portion again. To clarify that this is available to CHBA members on our website and that you have to be logged in to access the recording. On that note, the QR code on the right side of the slide here will bring you to the members page, exactly where we archive all our webinars. So you can see the previous webinars on this series there too. We will also post the PDF documents of the slide deck for each presentation on the same site. I'm pointing this out now because I will go through some slides probably fairly quickly. There's a lot of detail on there. And because I have at least one slide that I may skip entirely, knowing that you have access to this slide deck in PDF. As you can tell from the left side of the slide, our webinar series is growing now. Started with 3 webinars last fall, and it continues this winter and spring, and may not end before fall 2024. So you can use the QR codes to each of those on the left side to register for the respective future webinars. The purpose of the entire series is really simply to alert all of you to which changes are out for public review right now and which ones are still coming. And we're hoping we can help you understand what's being proposed and that we can guide you in your own review of the changes and submit your own comments, or that you can provide us with feedback as to what you would like to see in our public review comments that we submit on your behalf. We also hope that all the groups and professions in our membership find this equally helpful. Actually, let's do another poll right now to find out who is represented today in today's audience as to the professions or professional categories. You see, and we hope that we have the broadest profile of our memberships covered here. If not, we have to select other. But this is also important for us to know because some of our webinars have a slightly different audience profile. This one probably in particular because we're talking about renovation and we have both renovators and builder members. So that's why we split them up in the top there. And so yeah, when we're ready, Sarah will show the results. Not rushing, and we're now at 206 participants. So this is the 50% I was talking about. And for anyone who's just joined in the last few seconds, you haven't missed much. This is still the intro slide. Do we have the results? There you go. Good. That's a good sign that we have more renovators than anybody else. Excellent. And almost as many site builders and modular builders. A few government, architects, product manufacturers, and I have to scroll. And other, quite a bit. Okay, so interesting. Maybe we need to expand. We need to change Zoom, though, to allow us to have more than 10 choices. Thank you for that. That's great. Good to see also one municipal planner there. Nice. As you can see from the titles, today the focus is on proposed changes for renovation, and in 2 weeks we'll have the general overview of all changes, and then in April we have 2 deep dives, one on energy modeling and one on accessible dwellings. Those are both 2 new concepts that we'll introduce with a bit of a deeper dive. So please, if those interest you, make sure you register.
Hi, Frank. Sorry to interrupt. I'm
sure.
getting a prompt from Natasha. If you'd be able to just speak up a little bit, please.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Thank you so
No
much.
problem.
Sorry to interrupt. Thanks.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. No, that's very important. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I'll use my outside presenter voice then. Yeah, okay, so let's get to today's topic, which is an introduction of the changes coming to the 2025 National Construction Codes that will deal with renovation. For the national codes, this is a brand new subject and a first, but we know that this is not the case for all of you. In many provinces and municipalities, requirements for the alteration of existing buildings already exist. The last time I spoke to you about these in the November webinar, I spoke about the general provisions like application definition and all that upfront stuff in codes. Today, we're going straight to the changes on equipment and construction and practices when we actually renovate. And this can happen in housing of all kinds. And what we'd like to do is ask you another poll question on, this is poll number 3, Sarah, on the type of housing that you predominantly renovate or build an addition to in your practice. So we have all the housing types, or the most common housing types here: detached, semi-detached, row homes, stacked townhouses, MERBs, what we call 7+ units, and oh, that's ADU, I guess, auxiliary dwelling units. Anyway, so like coach carriage homes or lane, what do we call them? Lane suites? No, laneway suites. Thank you. They're called something different in every jurisdiction, but that's what we mean by ADUs there. So if you can pick what you predominantly work on, we know it's not a scientific percentage that we're asking here, just so that we know what we would keep in our mind when we review the changes on your behalf. Okay, and oh, okay, that's a clear favorite there. Detached single-family homes, perfect, 85%. That's strong. And then the other one's pretty much equal, and not so many ADUs yet. That's probably still coming with affordable housing solutions being on the rise. Great, thank you very much. So that actually confirms what we've been doing, predominantly assuming single-family detached. Okay, with that, is a quick outline of how we're going to tackle the subject today. I will do a quick recap of general information, like an update on where we are in the codes process and a refresher of why we're seeing the subject in the first place. And then I will go through those changes in detail that are currently out for public review and give you a preview of those changes still to come. And in the end, we'll hear from Sarah on the 2 related best practice manuals that we have, that CHBA has, that relate to renovation. Here's a schedule, and some of you may have seen this before, a schedule showing all the public reviews leading up to the 2025 codes, including the last one in the fall. And then the ones we're talking about today is the winter 2024 public review. It is going on right now. It started February 27, a little late, and it will still run until April 29. So that is when ours and your comments would have to be submitted by. But NRC, so last time you saw this, that spring 2024 public review wasn't there. NRC introduced another public review to which I refer to as a spring 2024 public review, and that one is scheduled to run from May 22nd to July 27th. We have color-coded all of these. It's not as critical today, but in general, it's to keep clear which changes go where. And then there is one more scheduled for the fall 2024 that is reserved for just updating of all reference documents within codes, including standards. And the code publication is still planned for December 2025. And then 18 months later, the provinces are expected to adopt these codes into their local legislation and regulations. This is a busy slide, but I wanted to give you an overview of all the subjects, and I mentioned some of these before, by which ones have gone or will go to which public review. As I said earlier, today we will go through the technical provisions proposed for the new Part 10 of the National Building Code for Part 9 buildings, and those are the ones in the middle portion. The PCFs, I've hyperlinked these proposed change forms. We call them PCFs lovingly. They're the actual documents that we will be reviewing and commenting on. The QR code goes to the public review site where you can see everything, including these proposed changes. Near the end of today's webinar, I will also briefly touch on two more technical provisions that we might see in the spring. So in the next one, they're not requiring more energy efficiency, but they might impose some conditions on energy-related renovations that improve airtightness or that take out existing furnace or water heater vents or venting solutions. So here's a quick view of the CHBA process of how we review proposed changes and how we develop comments during public reviews. We use this process to make sure we're reflecting our members' view on these comments. We're in the second phase here with CHBA national staff, holding information webinars, such as this one, and reviewing changes and drafting proposed comments. On this particular subject, we may also convene the same working group of renovators that has helped us over the last year and a bit to gather feedback specifically from renovators on these proposed changes. And after that, we present the comments to the Canadian Renovators Council Management Committee so they can distribute it within their provincial and regional memberships. And we often gain valuable insights during that step. And finally, CHBA staff will submit those comments. And sometimes provincial HBAs submit reinforcing comments or their own comments with province-specific details. Our aim here is with this process is to ensure that we're aligned on all three levels of the association. Thank you. Okay, I said I would refresh everyone's memory as to what's behind the subject. Simply put, a few provinces already have renovations requirements in their codes, and many, if not all, municipalities already have bylaws or permits for renovation projects. The problem is they are all different, and that is confusing and counterproductive. So the provinces and territories asked the NRC a while back and the Commission at the time to undertake this project. Another driver was also that the renovation market is bigger than the new construction market, and that a renovation code could be more effective in achieving societal goals such as aging in place or now energy retrofits. Now, I used the word retrofit here on purpose to clarify the next point. The renovation requirements are not intended to be applied retroactively and are not even to force mandatory renovations. The idea is simply that the requirements would apply to renovation projects where a building element that is part of the renovation project could be upgraded in terms of energy efficiency. That is also why energy efficiency was prioritized for the 2025 National Model Codes, because it was the most urgent. And because the code cycle was so short, the scope of the requirements was also limited to not cover all building types and not all alteration types. For example, change of occupancy was ruled out of scope, and no specific requirements were developed. And one more important point here, when we talk about the alteration of existing buildings, the existing building they're referring to with these requirements is 5 or more years old. The requirements will be located in a new Part 10 of the NBC, so it won't be a separate code. I may have said this last time. And then there were 8 principles developed by the committee that developed the concept. I've talked about those in a bit more detail in the November 24th webinar, so if that interests you, you can refer to that recording. Let's look at this slide again for 2 reasons. It looks very familiar like the other one. First, I wanted to emphasize again here and show you graphically that the proposed requirements do not mandate a renovation. It will not apply retroactively. And you see the arrow here, but the requirements would only apply to renovation projects where the extent of the renovation includes one of those technical areas. The second reason I want to show you this again is because it looks a little bit like a table of contents, and you see how the future code might look a little bit here. The general requirements in subsection 10.9.1, they are there because only Part 9 changes are being introduced at this point. And then the subsection 10.9.36 because they address energy efficiency, and the base requirements are kept in section 936. And so now you see how this works. If they add non-energy requirements, those would be in their own little subsection. For example, the last bullet you see refers to requirements in ventilation, which is normally section 932. So I would expect this to show up under section 10.9.32. Okay, this is my last slide of the quick recap, but it's an important one. Because the requirements in the Part 10, in the new Part 10, proposed Part 10, apply only to alterations, not to additions. For additions, it is assumed that all the current or then current code requirements would apply as if these additions were new buildings. And in 2025, this may also mean that the tiered requirements and proposed GHG requirements may apply to these additions. The existing portion of that building, however, if it is also part of the renovation project, would fall under the renovation requirements that are proposed for Part 10. And in projects that do not change the footprint or the elevation, in other words, where the entire project is an alteration, only the Part 10 requirements would apply. And here we have, again, the definition in a bit more detail of what existing building is. It is a building that is built more than 5 years before the code was effective. So let's say Manitoba makes the 2025 NBC effective by July 2026. Buildings completed before July 2021 would be existing buildings in that scenario. Okay, we have another poll that we, on this slide, would like to ask you, which is about renovations and additions. So we'd like to know what you predominantly, in your activity profile, are you doing more renovations, meaning alterations, or are you doing additions? So it's a simple 5-scale survey, so either you do more renovations or more additions, or about the same, or you predominantly do only one of them. So if you can let us know, because that would also allow us then to have a better idea of what we're looking for and how much attention we're spending on evaluating the proposed changes towards these renovation and alteration types. And also because, as I just said, the additions may have substantially more requirements. Okay, so that's actually fairly even here, about the same number, and then more renovations than additions, although only renovations, only additions is fairly even. That's interesting, and I think we're going to look at that again, but it seems a slight overweight, maybe 60-40 renovations, additions if we counted that. Thank you, everyone. This is my last slide. Alex, do we have any questions so far?
Yeah, we have one question, Frank. I currently have a project that is designated heritage. Would these sections apply?
No, they would not. I missed that in my previous slide, but heritage buildings are also one area that was hotly debated, I should say. The province and territories wanted it in, and other people wanted it in as well. In the end, though, it was getting too complicated, and then the province and territories called it off and said, okay, we realize we're not ready. we keep this out of scope. And so heritage buildings are currently excluded.
Oh, that's great. Nothing at this time, Frank. You're just doing such a good job, I guess. We'll keep moving. So the floor is
Well, this
yours.
was all recap, so I'm not so
Yeah.
surprised. I would expect a few more questions as we get into the exciting technical stuff, if we can use the word exciting when we come to codes. So let's start with the first technical change. The first one here is for service water heating systems. You can see at the right top, I included a QR code here. If you wanted to open up the actual PCF document, you can just scan that with your phone or your mobile device, and it gets you straight there. I've also hyperlinked each PCF here, so if you use the PDF afterwards, you can just click on those. And I do this for all the slides, so that was more like a public service announcement here. Maintenance and repair for water heaters are proposed to be exempt, and so that's also a common theme you will see throughout the changes. So just maintenance will not trigger any upgrades. If you're replacing a hot water tank within your renovation project, though, it has to conform to the equipment efficiency tables in the code, and you can see a snippet of that table at the bottom of the slide. If you replace piping or you installed new piping within the project, that piping should be insulated according to Article 936.4.4, which I have provided you that's in the current code already. But it's fairly simple. The first 2 meters downstream and upstream from the water tank would have to be insulated with minimum 12 millimeter pipe insulation. And for recirculating systems, the entire system has to be insulated, and obviously for unconditioned space, all piping would have to be insulated. And I think everyone in Canada would agree that that's not just smart, but it should be current practice. The code also mentions that there might be some provincial regulations on automatic temperature controls that may need to be complied with. And my understanding is that where these requirements exist, such as in Ontario, it is already current practice to add them to water heaters during renovation projects. And then there is an appendix note here for both service water heating and later HVAC requirements to make sure that old chimneys and makeup air vents are covered and sealed properly, which again is probably a safety concern and should be current practice. On the costing side here, when we compare current practice with code requirements, the equipment efficiency upgrade is considered cost neutral because the federal government energy efficiency regulations do not allow trading anything within Canada with lower equipment performance. So in other words, the code requires only what is available on the market, and the same is true for the automatic temperature control valves. They are also current, well, they're not regulated, but what I'm saying is they're also current practice. The only incremental cost here that we can see is the pipe insulation. If that wasn't part of your current practice and renovating before, that would be an incremental cost. But even at that, it is a fairly low cost impact. Let's get to HVAC systems then. Again, as you see, maintenance and repair of these systems are exempt from the requirements, but all HVAC systems and equipment has to comply with the same requirements as new construction in the base code. And I'm just going to pause here. That I think is surprised me a little bit because I thought in the past it was done the exact same as the service water heating, just the equipment tables. I found out yesterday it's all of the design issues. I've lined up all these issues here that have to comply, and I can see a few issues arising in an existing building. In the previous edition, as I said, it was just the equipment efficiency. Now it's piping, location of equipment, and sealing of ducts as well, although that's clarified. So we will look at that with the renovators in detail here. After that, it becomes a little easier to deal with the requirements here for alterations and additions separately. So where existing ducts or plenums are accessible, that portion of ducts or plenums should be sealed. In addition, all new ducts would need to be sealed, which is already covered in the general reference above. Then for additions, where previously unused spaces are converted to habitable or occupiable space, they should be provided with ventilation. And where capacity of the existing HVAC equipment is adequate to serve the existing or extended space, the equipment efficiency requirements need not apply. So, but I've pointed out here that those two bullets essentially need an analysis according to CSA F280, and when it's about heating capacity. I just mentioned ventilation here, but it also applies to heating, and you'd have to do a CSA F280 assessment in order to know whether it's equivalent or sufficient or not. And lastly, there's an appendix note here, again, for the proper closure of chimney and makeup air vents that I mentioned already. On the equipment costing side, we're seeing the same as for water heaters, so essentially cost neutrality, moderate incremental price where duct sealing and proper sizing of HVAC would not have been normal practice, but we could consider this accepted good practice. The item we need to look in further is the one where the entire system has to comply with all requirements in 936.3 in an existing buildings. So we will study that a little bit more. Should have maybe put a question mark behind that red dollar sign there. Okay, we're moving on to replacement of windows, doors, and skylights here. They are required to comply with the U values and ER values of the base code, which you can see on the bottom of the screen here. An explanatory note points out that an overriding provision in the general part, in part 10, says you can't make the building worse. So what that means in terms of windows is if you replace a window, let's say, or a couple of windows in a 10-year-old net zero building, you might have to make sure that you replace the windows with the same or better performance of what they currently are. In other words, it could be that they are better than the minimum code, and then you would have to replace them with that. So that's the note here that applies. An additional requirement is proposed that requires the window wall interface to be airtight. And again, I think that should be current practice, but please let us know if it's not, because we're talking about energy efficiency here. That is critical. Yeah, you may have noticed earlier in the slide that I put a red exclamation mark on the last slide behind the word repair, because repair is exempt, but we're finding that there are requirements here for glazing replacement. So repair is supposed to, yeah. So my interpretation of this is that if something breaks, the requirements wouldn't apply. But if you replace glazing as part of a renovation project, the requirements would apply. So maybe that needs to be clarified. And the table on the bottom right is the one that would apply in this case if you only replace the glazing. It would apply, it has a few options for each climate zone based on the frame that you put in, that you put the glazing in. And you can find out what type of glazing then is required. So you can see, for example, let's pick the last two columns in Edmonton. That would apply, for example, you would have to fit triple glazed half-inch glazing with 2 or more low E coatings in those existing frames. So it's a very prescriptive lookup kind of solution. We think making the wall window interface airtight can be considered cost neutral in terms of cost benefit here. It should be acceptable, low cost impact. However, we have some concerns on the administrative cost of the glazing replacement requirement and how it would be enforced to find out what the current glazing performance is, because it's not labeled on the glass. It is not clear to us what the cost difference might be between the selection of proposed code windows versus what renovators would install today, because that really is the kind of test we have to do for incremental cost, is what's current practice today and what would the code require. And we find that the cost impact analysis of this change misses that point a little bit, because they're making the point of the benefit of replacing your windows, which by the time your clients have hired you, you've already made that case. So we're going to probably comment on the impact analysis on this one.
Frank, if I could just jump in
Sure.
here, there's a few questions regarding the last handful of slides. So one of the questions that came in is, what about making windows bigger? So if the opening is getting bigger, would this apply?
Yeah, it would apply to the window requirements, I would say. So you would have to, if this is an existing building, meaning older than 5 years old, you'd have to follow these U values for that larger window. In Part 9, we don't have the fenestration to wall ratio, so you're not governed by that. You're governed by the U and ER values.
That's very clear. One more question regarding HVAC, as a few slides ago. I guess just to, reiterate what you had explained. If you are replacing the HVAC, but not opening walls, is that not acceptable with what you have written? Is that clear?
Yeah, if I understand the question correctly, if it's really just, let's say you replace a furnace with a heat pump, that so this is in what I thought was the previous edition here. It would just say follow the equipment efficiency table, and that would be all that you have to do. And the ducts that are accessible, you have to seal them. So if you're really, it will be only the ones, the main plenum that goes up. And so that should be acceptable as long as you have the equipment efficiency that the code is asking for. And you don't have to redesign the entire system. So this sentence in the actual code either is missing a where applicable. In other words, if you take out the ducts, obviously some requirements would, or if your location is wrong, which means the location of the equipment. So those are all kinds of questions we need to investigate a bit. But otherwise, simple, furnace out, heat pump in, should only matter in terms of the equipment efficiency.
Yeah, that's very clear. I'll let you get back to airtightness. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks for reminding me where I was. Okay, the proposed requirements for airtightness are actually fairly simple. They apply whenever you make a hole into an existing air barrier or where no air barrier exists. In those cases, the proposed provisions that you either seal those areas or install new air barrier systems according to the prescriptive requirements in 936, or that you test the entire home. This would be, for example, the case of in the case of an energy retrofit that receives grants or has to comply with the EnerGuide system for other reasons. The testing could also be used if you're building an addition and your province has adopted a higher energy tier where you can receive prescriptive points for airtightness. While the proposed requirement for airtightness is surprisingly simple, improving the airtightness in a renovation project and not interfering with other building systems can be a challenge. That's why the committee wrote a longish explanatory note here on the house as a system. The note points out that there are many possible air barrier materials and that many building materials have also multiple functions. Some insulations could be air barriers, some air barriers could be vapor barriers, and so on. If the committee or the note then recognizes that there are simple cases where maintaining or improving airtightness doesn't cause any or many implications for other building systems, and those simple cases would be like a single room or single space renovation, or on the other side, a whole building retrofit. Makes it simple because you're dealing with all surfaces. The note then discusses the more complex cases of half-house renovations, where issues of thermal comfort, ventilation, or the risk of condensation may have to be taken into consideration. In other words, there are known implications for other building systems. And in this context, the proposed appendix note then references CHBA's Renovators Manual. There's quite a bit of that information in there on how to deal with these things. The last portion of the explanatory note then highlights the direct impact of improved airtightness on the effectiveness of ventilation and or heating or cooling systems, and the impact that improved airtightness may have on indoor air quality, namely radon, I think is mentioned there as well. On the costing side, there's not much concern. Like we can see here, when we spoke to renovators, we found that sealing air barriers or installing air barriers where there were none is common practice. That doesn't necessarily mean it's simple or cheap. It just means it's common practice to do that. In that sense, the code requirements would be cost neutral because it doesn't require anything that we don't already do. There may be a modest increase for airtightness testing in addition to the labor of installing an air barrier and sealing penetrations and so on, which has to happen anyway. But testing, as I said earlier, offers a more seamless integration with the energy incentive programs. That brings us to our values. Thermal resistance, we start with the above grade assemblies, walls, attics, floors over unheated spaces, and cathedral ceilings. Again, maintenance and repair would be exempt. All the other requirements can be summarized really in three simple steps. Assess the R value of, let's say, the wall or ceiling you're renovating. Bring up the insulation value to the code minimum. Then follow all Part 9 requirements for installation of insulation. However, the committees recognize that there will be situations where it isn't possible to achieve that. In older versions, this provision said apply insulation where practical, but that was also very qualitative, and it's very difficult to say what's practical. So in the end, the committee agreed to say improve the assembly to the extent possible, which I have to agree is probably a better way to say that. The code even recognizes a number of limitations or conflicting requirements, and in the associated explanatory note, they explain that in extreme cases, this phrase, to the extent possible, may mean not at all possible. But then, oh, and they also, the appendix note also offers, oh no, it's the sentence that is clear that you can also use the trade-off method in 936, where you can insulate one assembly a little more in one place in order to make up for areas that are difficult to insulate, as long as the sum of all areas and R values are equivalent. The requirements for below ground assemblies are, like basement slabs or foundation walls, are almost identical to those we just discussed, except for what I highlighted here in yellow, different code table for the reference of the R values, and the fact that you can't use the A over R method to trade between R values between assemblies, because that method does not apply to below grade assemblies. The explanatory note in this section then applies to both articles, and that's why I was talking about earlier. They talk about typical insulation issues in existing buildings and reference some guidance documents, typical failure modes of insulation, for example. And then there's a list of key insulation requirements in Part 9 that I mentioned earlier. So the requirement is in the code, and the list of typical Part 9 insulation requirements that may affect your project are listed here. Here's then a summary of the explanatory note on the extent possible. It lists a number of these examples where limitations exist, and then it states that it is an acceptable outcome for specific locations that installing additional insulation may not be possible. But in those cases, it goes on, this note then cautions that there could be undesirable consequences, for example, condensation, or I think they also mentioned degradation of masonry, and we found this great picture that points it all out. So you have to be careful and also not to cause condensation. And oh yeah, there's one more appendix note here that clarifies that the base code does not require insulation under the basement slab, and that it is therefore also not required in renovations. However, the appendix note suggests there are benefits of doing so where the whole or substantial parts of the basement slabs are being replaced. So that's a good suggestion. It may or may not apply to your project. And it's in the appendix, so it's not binding. On this subject, PCFs 1829, 1850, below and above grade, the incremental construction cost may actually be significant. It's the only one, really. If I summarize the requirements, in both of those cases, it would say where these assemblies are being altered within a project. All Part 9 requirements for insulation apply, and R values need to be brought up to code values in these tables. This may actually impose more cost than what your project included. Think of a siding replacement, for example. You're altering the exterior wall, and the R value requirements would therefore apply if the wall isn't already up to the code level. So this could potentially add cost to your project that you didn't have before. That's why this is the only one that adds significant cost. This is known, and this was actually deliberate by the people who wanted this renovation code or these requirements, because sometimes it is something that they refer to as an opportunity cost or as an opportunity policy case, and it was one of their motivations to actually get this going. Because one reason for these requirements to be here is that they wanted to move the needle in improving the energy efficiency performance of the existing building stock. With that, I'll get to the other two changes that we're expecting for the public review in the spring, and they both refer to house as a system consideration. Alex, maybe I should stop at this point. Are there any questions so far on the previous set?
Yeah, there's some really, really good questions coming in. We'll go through a couple. And pardon me for paraphrasing some of the questions, but we'll go back to HVAC, Frank. When
Yep.
adding the HRV in the system, would you need to redesign the ducting?
That's really a question for an HVAC designer. First of all, is it if the HRV can handle the existing ducting? I would see no reason, but if there are performance issues, then maybe yes. So that's more of an HVAC design question. Is it necessary in order to make the equipment work effectively? Um, in in my understanding of the requirements, of the proposed requirements, the scope of the project determines what requirements apply to, and if you only replace your ventilation um, appliance, then only requirements for that scope should apply. So the answer would be no. If there are any ducts visible or accessible, they would have to be sealed. And I think, again, so they're operated and they're tried out a lot of different pieces of wording. If it's practical, if it's accessible, if it's within reason. So the committee played with all of those things. That's definitely the spirit of the changes, but how it's interpreted obviously is then subject to the discussion between the renovator and the building official sometimes.
Of course. On to the next question. What is the trigger for radon requirements?
Yeah, so the trigger essentially is if I have a two-story building and let's say I'm renovating the upper story and I make it very airtight, and or even the entire building, make it very airtight, and I'm not paying particular attention to any penetration below ground, any pipe, any wire coming in, or if I don't have access to the floor slab and I cannot seal the cracks, that's so it should essentially trigger the moment I do an airtightment improvement project. I should also consider that I need to address radon, at least leave a radon test behind to say the owner should test for that. It is one of the, it's also a topic in the next public review, I believe, or even in this one. The radon requirements are changing, and there's a general feel that not enough is done about radon, and especially where we do energy upgrades. That is one system implication. If you want, you update the airtightness, you may create an environment in this airtight house that accumulates more gas or contaminants of any kind. And so then your ventilation solution may have to take care of it, or in some cases, a radon fan.
Yeah, that's great. For clarity, when doing an exterior focused net zero renovation with complete building envelope upgrade, would there be a requirement to replace, would there also be a requirement to replace the 2010 windows? Does that question make sense?
Mm-hmm. Again, if it's in the scope of the project to replace the windows, then yes. If not, then no. So this is how I'm hoping it will be interpreted everywhere. The scope of the project defines which requirements apply. If you're not replacing the windows, the requirements will not apply. So and plus the 2010 windows, if I had to guess, should be fairly close to the performance anyway.
That's a great response. I'll go through a couple more because I know we have to move on. Um, you mentioned siding being changed. But what about siding being replaced? So if there was some deterioration to some of your wood siding and you're just changing some of that section, what would happen then?
Excellent question. And again, this would have to be what the difference is between repairing. Let's say there's storm damage. Is that a repair? Probably. The storm damage would be a repair. The replacement, if it's deteriorated, is it for aesthetics? So the difference here between what is a repair and what is a replacement, unfortunately, will probably come down to the understanding of the municipality in this case. And so if any of these questions, by the way, thanks for asking these, because we will put that in our comment to say there are things that are not clear. At least an appendix note needs to be introduced to clarify these things.
Yeah, that's great. Perhaps we can move on and then we will circle back to these
Yeah,
questions. There's a
I
lot of
think
good
so.
questions coming in, so
For
that's
sure.
great.
And that's half the reason why we have this webinar. So
Yeah,
thanks,
thanks.
Alex, for curating those. So let me just say a few words here on the next public review. Um, CHBA has been supporting all along that the subject of renovation in codes should not be started with a single subject like energy efficiency and isolation. So in a way, we're happy that in the next public review, the codes committees agreed with us and went beyond the original mandate for these proposed changes of energy efficiency only. But we still need to make sure in the next public review that the solutions proposed are not going too far. And as I said earlier, these are not energy related. They're sort of a follow-on house as a system consideration. The first one here deals with adequate ventilation. The new requirement will likely be located somewhere else in the new part 10, probably in 10.932, as I said earlier. The requirements would say that you have to make sure your project provides the minimum code required ventilation in two typical renovation cases. The first is when you have significantly improved the airtightness of the home. The second is when you seal up openings that were previously used for naturally aspirated fuel-fired appliances, in other words, furnaces or wood fireplaces or water heaters that were vented through chimneys. The exception is where a bathroom or kitchen fans are present, even if they are what is typically called exhaust-only ventilation. So they're kind of grandfathered in. However, if you're installing a new ventilation system because your project falls under these two cases, then exhaust-only systems are not allowed to be installed anymore. So then it asks for a proper ventilation design in that case because you sealed up some other stuff. I think that makes sense for sure in the case A there for ventilation and for airtightness. Then, where you may have improved the airtightness significantly, as we just discussed with the radon example, actually. The second item yet to come is about sealing foundation walls and basement slabs. This one talks about the radon issue, actually. The main reason for this is to minimize the risk that indoor concentrations of radon and soil gas are increasing, even though you have tried to improve the overall performance of the home. So this would, be counter that general rule of can't make the home worse. Essentially, what will be proposed here is to seal all accessible exposed cracks and penetrations in areas that are within the extent of the alteration. Below ground, this would be triggered in projects where you have improved the airtightness significantly, as I discussed earlier. I would assume that a basement renovation would have done this as current practice, but I would think this is an important consideration where your project only renovates an upper story and makes it much more airtight. In that case, in particular, you may want to make sure radon is not inadvertently increased. This is a list of writing tips here for public review comments, because if they're well written, they can make a difference. I will skip this slide with a reminder that you can download the PDF slide deck from our site. On the right side, oh, no, not anymore. I put this on the next slide. Because after this slide, we can either pause for more questions or, I'm looking at the time, switch over to Sarah. To summarize here all the changes, I just put them again on the screen with the QR code to the board's website where you can look at them all. We're hoping that the details I presented here have empowered you to submit comments to these proposals or to let us know which issues you're dealing with in your projects that may be problematic with what is being proposed. What we want to do is ask you another question. With this list in front of you and having heard all the details of what's coming, we would like to ask you this question here of whether these changes, if they came to you, would make a difference to your projects. So, as I said earlier, we understand that many municipalities already have requirements. Some of them are above the national codes, and some of them provincial requirements. Some of them provincial requirements, but not energy related. So it goes all over the place. So we wanted to know if you thought that these changes, these proposed changes, actually move the needle a lot, or if they're fairly close to current practice. So whenever you have picked your results, there you go. We'll see. Interesting. Okay, so we have, I would say, a slight majority there on the no, they will not. Either you are already required to do more or you are already voluntarily renovating to a better standard. But a decent, I would say, what is that, 60/40? Or yeah, it's roughly 60/40. Um, so that's very good because that proves for me as a former code development person that we're fairly close to what should be the minimum acceptable, that the majority of the market is already there, and that some of them uh, would have to increase there. But it should always be like that. Great, thank you. That's excellent information. And with that, I pass it on to Sarah. And I think, Sarah, you're going to introduce your own poll, or do we want me to do that?
I can do that. Thanks, Frank. We've got one last poll for you. So this is really to help us understand, okay, what comes next? So on which one of these code changes would you like more information? And you can select multiple here. Really, we're looking at once this public review period's over and the new code is published, how can we continue to support you? So this is really looking at, what topics would you like more information on? So seeing the results coming in right now, seeing a lot on airtightness requirements. This is, as I said, this is really going to help us just understand, what can we offer? Is it additional webinars on these topics, potentially some additional training, or just information? So I'm going to end this, share these results with you. So yeah, you can see here we've
Wow,
got, about 70% on that airtightness requirements. Yeah.
and HVAC systems, actually, that's not surprising because there's so much happening on that side with heat pumps coming in and them needing, I guess, really better ducting, for example. That's also a big scope issue. But otherwise, it's fairly even. Maybe we can skip service water heater systems. So there you go. But that's great. Great information, everyone. Thank you. Back to you, Sarah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So we have time for a few more slides, and I want you to stay with me because we've got some discounts for you at the end. So I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the CHBA Builder's Manual. It was first published 30 years ago. It's gone through multiple revisions and updates. But did you know that we also have a Renovator's Manual? So this was published in 2021. Really, it's so much more than a manual. This is really a best practice guide to renovations in Canada, going above and beyond compliance. But really, even more than that, this is an indispensable training resource. So I know we've got a bunch of renovators on the call. Many of you have probably been in the industry 50, 15, 20, 25 years or more. You know what you're doing, but I really want you to think of this for your new and for your junior staff. So this is really the perfect complement for, that on-the-job training that you're already doing with them. So going on to the next slide, a big part of what we do at CHBA is make sure that our members are prepared for what is coming next. Certainly the theme for the webinar that we're doing now, and the Adaptive Home Program is really no exception to that. So the demand for home modifications, it's here. With our 10 million Canadians age 60 plus, that represents more than a third of the population. The vast majority of these are homeowners, and they're homeowners who want to stay in their homes for the rest of their lives. They're looking for qualified people to be able to adapt to their homes. So that's really what this course is all about. The adaptive home renovation, it's really an approach to home modifications for individuals who want to stay in their home for as long as they can, regardless of age or condition. This is a 2-day adaptive home course. It's really a deep dive into the adaptive home manual that was just published in 2023. Participants will gain specific building knowledge on, really key areas in the home. So you're looking at modifying entrances, kitchens, bathrooms, transition areas. The course also includes interactive case studies. So once you've really gone through that deep dive of the manual, then it gives participants an opportunity to learn, to really put what they've learned to use, into action. We have at least 2 more of these virtual sessions planned, virtual courses planned for this year. The dates are May 28th and 29th, and also September 17th and 18th. So registration will be open soon, but in the meantime, if you're interested, you can send an email to adaptivehome@chba.ca, and that's going to get you a notification as soon as registration opens before the general public. So just a note that seating in this course is limited. We have sold out the last 2 sessions, and we think that we will continue to do so. I know we have some HBA staff on the call as well. If you're interested in offering this course for your members, get in touch with me and we can certainly have that discussion. And the next slide is going to show you, okay, what happens next once you take this course. You've really become part of this network of professionals that are offering these services to homeowners. And we're really trying to make that a true network of people. So you're learning, you're meeting other people in the course. So we've had designers, we've had architects, we've had realtors, we've had occupational therapists all take this course. So you're really learning from other people in the industry as well. Once you've taken the course, you'll be recognized as a qualified adaptive home specialist. And we're creating a full suite of resources to help you really market that designation. So you'll be able to use this logo. We've got brochures, one-pagers. We're working on a press release and social media assets for you as well. So my last slide here is this limited time offer and this discount that I mentioned. So you see QR codes on your screen. This is going to take you right to the order pages on our website. You already get a discount for being a CHBA member. You already get a discount if you bundle these and order more than one. But for all of you that have, over 200 of you that have sat through this webinar with us, you're getting an extra promotional code. So once you go through the ordering process, you're going to see an opportunity to put in a promotional code. If you put in Reno codes, that's going to get you an extra $10 off the member price. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to Alex to see if we have any more questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. That was great. Frank, there are a lot of really, really great questions. So let's go through them. I know we have 3 minutes left, but let's go over time if whoever is able to stick around. This one question.
Maybe we
Go ahead, Frank.
should announce that so we can stick around a little bit if we have so many questions. If you have to drop off, obviously we understand. Thank you for attending. If we go for a few minutes longer, you will be able to watch our responses to the questions in the recording later on. Anyway,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alex.
Thanks for clarifying that, Frank. This one question came in is regarding windows. Currently, our municipality does not require a permit when replacing the window, so using the same opening. With the new code changes, should permits be pulled for window replacements?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it has been discussed by the committees as well. Whether one of the consequences of these changes is that there will be more and more specific permits being pulled or being asked for. That, in my view, would be I guess, an unfortunate consequence. But I agree that I cannot see the requirements being enforced other than someone, especially the glazing one, for example, other than actually specifically an inspection or a permit for window replacement. So it's probably likely, maybe not ideal. If you have any thoughts of what should happen instead, please let us know, because I think those things are still under discussion. And this is maybe a little plug for the process that happens to these changes afterwards. When they have gone through public review and all public comments have been received, and let's say we make that a comment, turn this question into a comment, the committees would have to view that comment and discuss it and potentially have action to revise the change or provide some administrative guides to municipalities in that sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question and great response. This question came in. Can you clarify the permit submission requirements for an addition? Does one need to submit the energy efficiency design summary form? And if so, do you include the existing windows, existing doors, along with the new windows and new doors? What wall area do you use? Frank, I used to work in this world, but I'll let you take a crack at it.
Well,
But I'm
I was
happy.
actually going to call you. First of all, I think what I would say is this may be different from municipality to municipality, and maybe the fact that these changes are coming and that they're making their way from national codes to being adopted, um, hopefully they have the effect of maybe introducing a more consistent way of applying them. But how that works is probably different in every municipality, and I'll let Alex speak to the rest of that if you want to add
Oh, of
something.
course. Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. It's certainly going to depend on the authority having jurisdiction. The municipality that I previously worked at, um, if the addition was flush with the existing wall, um, can you clarify? You do not need to submit an energy efficiency design summary for an addition. That was according to this particular authority having
Mm-hmm.
jurisdiction. Um, and you do include the existing windows and the new windows as part of the calculation. And you use the existing wall and the new wall, top of grade, underside of second floor ceiling, if it is a two-story home, for example. Those are the areas that you do use. So you use existing and proposed.
And I can maybe just add that obviously the modeling of where you have an addition, you have an old portion of the building and a new portion of the building is very tricky. Um, and that's why I think the power of prescriptive requirements in the national codes will come in handy because you can actually just assess the addition um, by prescriptive means rather than by having to model and being uh, sort of, how do you model that open portion between the two? So there's definitely still questions. And as I said, every question here probably leads us to think about, do we want to comment? Is it clear? So we will take all of this into consideration.
Yeah.
How many more do we have?
A couple. Does
That's
a
good.
does a mechanical change triggered by Part 10 trigger the requirement for CSA F280 and or confirmation of existing ducting sufficiency for altered supply temperature of high efficiency and heat pump alternatives? So taking out your old furnace, putting in a new heat pump. I'll give the floor to you.
That is my understanding. If you do look at the change, the wording, I think it's not linking directly to CSAF 280, but according to my understanding, it's currently the only standard that can be used for that to prove that, um, especially where you have new added spaces. In that case, it's definite. Um, on the other one, on the replacing, that is exactly why I put a big red exclamation mark there earlier, because I would like to look at that again to say, in my understanding, it was just old system out or old equipment out, new equipment in. All that matters is equipment efficiency requirement. And if the heat pump is on the table and it meets the requirement, check. Now that the entire subsection is referenced, I will take this question and look exactly at that. And would that mean that the entire building, the entire HVAC system, heating system in this case, would need to be redesigned, reevaluated? So it's an excellent question. And unfortunately, I don't have a distinct or clear answer, but again, that question may lead to an excellent comment.
Yeah, that's excellent. So I'll go through this one last question, Frank. Is there not a concern that simply referring to the applicable requirements within Part 9 with respect to envelope improvement are pretty non-specific and may lead to challenges with hygrothermic failure? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, well, I did actually comment on that earlier. We would have liked, so in general, CHBA, I think, has always been on the record to support addressing the existing building stock because it's the bigger portion, and the smaller change on the existing building stock moves the needle bigger than uh, you know on the new construction buildings. On this particular question for the building envelope, and you may have seen it, I just lost power here. It's very interesting. So on the building envelope question, the maybe you can read it to me again because I was very distracted.
Yeah, sorry,
No, that's good.
basically
Oh,
for
you flipped it
the
away.
hygrothermic problems
Oh,
regarding
yes. So what I was going to say, and what I commented on earlier, is that that's a house as a system consideration, right? all the implications of adding insulation, of adding additions with more insulation on an old building that isn't being altered, all those things should have been addressed with all aspects of building performance in mind. That is condensation, moisture management, airtightness, ventilation, heating systems for non-energy efficiency aspects of the building performance. So as a wholesome solution, alterations to existing buildings would have been great. Because of time issues, because of urgency, it was chosen to only address energy efficiency. And unfortunately, much of this guidance will only be available in appendix notes. It will be left to the industry to manage that in the field, so to speak. Not ideal, totally agree. Ideally, it would have been treated in a wholesome way. I can only plug in the CHBA Renovators Manual again, because that book is full of house as a system, has detailed discussions on what energy efficiency changes cause in terms of implications and how to address them. And that's probably also why it was referenced by the code committee here. So I hope that's enough. I share the concern.
Yeah, that's great. And just thanks to all the participants who asked really great questions, some really good dialogue. That's everything from this end, Frank. So I'll let you, and thanks, Sarah. I'll let you send it off,
Yeah.
Frank.
Thank you so much, everyone. There's still 140 people, so thanks for staying on. And we will post the slide deck and the recording hopefully early next week. If you're lucky this afternoon, we don't know. We encourage you to review the code changes that affect you and work with your local HBA to submit comments or send them to us. And of course, don't forget to sign up to our next 3 webinars. With that, thank you so much for your time, and have a nice rest of the day and weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.